I've had people wondering when I was going to leave. Bob Lanier, who's retired, I did a movie with Bruce Lee a long time ago. He said, I like that movie because she got killed.
Finally, you're going to get out, huh?
I think what we do as a unit will overshadow anything that we do individually. If we are able to rise to the same level that we did last year, we'll have a very good year. We'll win 60 games, or almost 60 games. But that's not going to keep some other team from rising higher. I didn't have any concrete idea how I could be involved, but it seemed to make sense. And a number of things dovetailed. I had been interested in coaching and hadn't really gotten any opportunities.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wasn't just a dominant force in the paint. He was an intellectual, a leader, and one of the most cerebral players ever to touch a basketball court. His signature move, the skyhook, was practically unguardable. His resume, nearly untouchable. 6 NBA championships, 6 MVP awards, 19 All-Star appearances. For decades, he held the title of all-time scoring leader. But what really set Kareem apart was how he saw the game. To him, basketball wasn't just stats or flash. It was craft, discipline, and influence. He respected players who offered more than talent, those who shaped eras, lifted teammates, and brought timeless basketball intelligence to every possession. So when a mind like Kareem's names his favorite players, it's rarely about popularity. It's about substance. Some of these names were rivals he faced head-to-head. Others were players he never demanded matchups with, but deeply admired. Some pushed him. Some expanded his basketball worldview. These aren't simply legendary names. They are players who, in Kareem's view, embodied basketball's highest ideals: precision, leadership, longevity, and depth of impact. From titans who challenged him in the post to visionaries who rewrote the game. Here are the 5 players Kareem Abdul-Jabbar respected most. But before proceeding, please take a second and subscribe and like this video. It will be very motivation for us. When Kareem Abdul-Jabbar spoke about the pillars of basketball, not just the most talented players, but those who changed the way the game was played, Bill Russell's name was always near the top. They never met in an NBA matchup. By the time Kareem entered the league in 1969, Russell had already retired. But that didn't stop Kareem from seeing Russell as a standard, not for scoring, not for flash, but for purpose. Russell won 11 championships in 13 seasons, a feat that remains untouched. He was the anchor of the Celtics dynasty, a defensive mastermind, a rebounding machine, and perhaps most importantly, a player whose value transcended numbers. In an era before blocks and defensive metrics were tracked, Russell dominated the space in between statistics. He altered shots, he changed decisions, he shut down momentum. To Kareem, this was crucial. At 7 feet 2 inches, Kareem's physical gifts were obvious. But what impressed him most about Russell was how much could be done without the ball, how one player could dictate tempo, disrupt rhythm, and lead a team not through volume, but through consistency and clarity. Russell's scoring totals, just over 14,000 points in his career, weren't eye-popping. He averaged 15.1 points and 22.5 rebounds per game, but scoring was never his priority. For Kareem, that wasn't a weakness. It was a decision, a commitment to the system, to playing the role the team needed, not chasing individual milestones. And that mindset had a lasting influence. When Kareem began his NBA career with the Milwaukee Bucks, he didn't just study how to score with the skyhook. He studied what it meant to lead. He watched film, read quotes, and internalized how Russell commanded trust in the locker room. Not by yelling, not by demanding shots, but by making the right play, being where he needed to be, and elevating those around him. There was also a deeper layer, one that extended beyond basketball. Kareem respected Russell as a man of conviction, a public figure who never hid from controversy. Russell stood with Muhammad Ali at the 1967 Cleveland Summit, spoke out against racism in Boston, and took a stand as the first black head coach in American pro sports. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were examples of using status for substance. Kareem followed that lead. When he changed his name in 1971, converted to Islam, and faced backlash from media and fans, Russell was one of the few retired players who reached out in support. They weren't close friends in a traditional sense, but the respect was mutual and enduring. Two athletes who viewed basketball as a platform, not a finish line. On the court, Kareem never tried to emulate Russell's game. They were built differently. Kareem was taller, leaner, and more offensively skilled, but he did borrow Russell's mindset, controlling the paint, anchoring the defense, staying calm in chaos. And when it came to the biggest games, Kareem mirrored Russell's intensity. Russell went 10-0 in Game 7s. a stat that defined his clutch performance. And though their eras were separated by rule changes, expansion teams, and different offensive philosophies, the traits that made Russell dominant, preparation, positioning, awareness, were visible in Kareem's approach too. Over time, Kareem's own resume would grow. 6 MVPs, 19 All-Star selections, and eventually, the NBA's all-time leading scorer. But even as he built his own legacy, he never discounted what came before. When younger generations asked him who paved the way, he rarely hesitated. Bill Russell was always one of the first names he mentioned. Even late into their lives, whenever Kareem and Russell appeared together at NBA 75 ceremonies or roundtable interviews, the admiration was visible. Kareem would refer to Russell as a giant in every sense, and often deferred credit back to him when asked about team success. "Before I ever made it to a finals," Kareem once said, Bill Russell had already defined what it meant to win. In interviews, Kareem sometimes drew a comparison. While Wilt Chamberlain dominated headlines with stat lines, Russell dominated eras with outcomes. That distinction mattered. Kareem believed in execution, in subtle control of the floor, and Russell gave him a model for that. Not in highlight clips, but in decisions, in presence, in results. And maybe that's why, even decades later, when lists of greatest centers or most impactful players made the rounds, Kareem never got defensive. He knew his place in history, and he knew Russell's. Different skill set, different strengths, but both architects of sustained excellence. For Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell wasn't just a historical figure. He was a North Star, a reminder that greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just wins, again and again and again.
Well, he taught me personally that you don't have to sacrifice what you want to say as a man from what you are invited to say as an athlete. There's room for both in your life, and you should express yourself in both ways, your profession and then what you believe in and what is important to you as a human being and as a citizen. Those things don't have to not be able to coexist.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar never played the game emotionally. He wasn't drawn to flash, flair, or trash talk. He valued consistency, precision, the kind of player who made his team better and demanded excellence through action. So when he picked Larry Bird as one of the few opponents he truly respected, it wasn't for show. It was because Bird played the game the way Kareem believed it should be played. When Bird entered the NBA in 1979, the Celtics were a team in decline. Within one season, they went from 29 wins to 61. That turnaround didn't happen because Bird scored 40 every night. It happened because he understood how to impact the game without forcing it. Kareem watched that kind of transformation closely. He knew it wasn't luck. Bird wasn't the fastest guy on the court. He didn't jump high. He wasn't built like a sprinter or glide like a guard, but he thought the game better than almost anyone Kareem had faced. He read defenses like a veteran, moved the ball a step ahead of the help rotation, and always made the simple play when others looked for the spectacular one. And when the Celtics met the Lakers, everything intensified. From 1984 to 1987, they clashed in the finals 3 times. Bird was the emotional leader of Boston, just as Magic and Kareem ran the Lakers. But it wasn't just about leadership. Bird's game translated to wins. In those matchups, Bird averaged 23 points, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists, usually against elite defenders and within the most physical era in NBA history. Kareem wasn't usually assigned to guard Bird, but he studied him. He saw how Bird used angles, not speed, timing, not athleticism. A single shoulder fake created just enough space for a high-release jumper that defenders couldn't reach. A half-step cut freed him for a layup off a McHale screen, and when the defense shifted too far, he'd fire a pass to a shooter waiting in rhythm. What Kareem respected most was Bird's economy of motion. Nothing was wasted. He didn't need the ball to dominate a game. He didn't hunt highlights. He simply made winning plays over and over. Bird won 3 MVPs from 1984 to 1986. No other forward in NBA history had done that. Not Dr. J, not Karl Malone, not even LeBron. Kareem understood how rare that was. MVPs aren't handed out for style. They're for players who carry franchises physically, mentally, and emotionally over an 82-game grind. Despite the tension between the Celtics and Lakers, Kareem never let personal bias cloud his judgment. Bird trash-talked, sure. He'd tell defenders exactly where he planned to shoot, and then do it. But it wasn't arrogance for its own sake. It was confidence rooted in preparation and game awareness. Even when Kareem didn't like the antics, he respected the execution. Off the court, Bird and Kareem weren't close. Their personalities were different. Bird was direct, rural, and private. Kareem was intellectual, reserved, and deeply principled. But in Bird, Kareem saw a kindred mindset, someone who elevated teammates, didn't cut corners, and didn't fear the moment. Kareem once said, "Larry Bird is one of those players you could never relax against. If you stopped him from scoring, he'd rebound. If you shut off the lane, he'd hit open teammates. He just always found a way." That's what made Bird special and frustrating. You could game plan for his moves, but he still found ways to hurt you. He played through injury, fatigue, and pressure without changing his demeanor. And when it mattered most, he delivered. Even into the late 80s, when Kareem's career was winding down and Bird's back was starting to wear on him, the respect remained. Kareem knew Bird's numbers weren't padded. They came through real adversity, the kind Kareem himself understood. When fans debate all-time greats, flash often clouds the conversation. But Kareem's inclusion of Bird in his personal pantheon isn't based on marketing or nostalgia. It's based on what actually wins games. Bird wasn't there to entertain. He was there to break you down, one possession at a time. And if you slipped for even a moment, one blown rotation, one late closeout, one lazy switch, he'd make you pay. That, more than anything, is why Kareem named Larry Bird one of his favorite players. He earned it. Every night, every season, every possession.
And he was ridiculous. He came on here. I remember our sportscaster played the Superman theme when he was talking about him that night after the game because he did everything.
Right.
Points, rebounds, assists, just steals, you name it. Larry has such a great mind for the game. And a great touch. I had a lot of respect for him as a competitor.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar didn't hand out compliments easily, especially not to centers. In a league where dominance was often measured by size and strength, Kareem valued something different: grace, footwork, intelligence, and defensive responsibility. So when he named Hakeem Olajuwon as one of his all-time favorite players, it wasn't just respect, it was acknowledgement of a peer who mastered the same elements Kareem once built his own legacy on, and then expanded them. By the time Olajuwon entered the league as the number 1 overall pick in 1984, Kareem was already a 6-time MVP and well into his 30s. But he wasn't just watching a newcomer from afar, he was still playing against him. And early on, it became clear that Hakeem was different. He wasn't just a shot blocker or a rebounder, he was a technician. Olajuwon's footwork was unlike anything the league had seen since Kareem himself. Maybe better in some ways. Kareem once said that Hakeem had the best footwork for a big man in NBA history. That wasn't hyperbole. That was coming from a player whose own skyhook was built on immaculate balance and timing. Kareem understood what it took to create space in the post, and he saw in Olajuwon a player who could do that in 3 directions with either foot from a standstill or a pivot. The Dream Shake wasn't just a flashy move. It was a series of options chained together through patience and precision. And while defenders often looked foolish reacting to it, the real artistry was in Hakeem's ability to read the defender's weight and rhythm. Kareem saw it. He'd done it, and he appreciated that Olajuwon made post-play into an evolving language rather than a predictable sequence. But Olajuwon wasn't just offense. In fact, Kareem often emphasized defense when talking about Hakeem. He praised how Olajuwon anchored a team without gambling, how he didn't just block shots, he deterred them. Olajuwon ranks first all-time in total blocks with 3,830, a number Kareem respected not just because of volume, but because of how Hakeem got there, through timing, not chasing. In the 1994 playoffs, when Hakeem led the Rockets to their first title, Kareem wasn't on the court anymore, but he was watching. And what he saw was a complete center commanding every possession. In the finals against Patrick Ewing, Olajuwon averaged 27 points, 9 rebounds, and 3.9 blocks per game. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. He orchestrated Houston's entire offense from the low block, absorbing double teams and creating open looks for teammates like Kenny Smith and Robert Horry. On the other end, he altered the flow of New York's entire half-court offense. When the Rockets went back-to-back in 1995, sweeping the Shaquille O'Neal-led Orlando Magic, Kareem watched Hakeem neutralize the most physically imposing young center in the league. It wasn't about brute force, it was about skill and discipline. Hakeem averaged 32.8 points in that final series while holding Shaq below his usual efficiency. That was the torch-passing moment, not from Kareem to Shaq, but from Kareem's style of thoughtful dominance to Hakeem's refined evolution of it. What Kareem appreciated most wasn't just the highlight reels or the accolades, it was Hakeem's consistency of intent. He approached the game with humility, even when dominating, He respected spacing, played unselfishly, communicated on defense, and never disengaged, even when the game wasn't going through him. There's another reason Kareem valued Hakeem: work ethic. In an era where some stars coasted through regular season stretches, Olajuwon never did. He was known to run stairs, train barefoot, fast during Ramadan, and stay in game shape year-round. Kareem, who famously kept a meticulous physical and mental regimen himself, admired that kind of internal discipline. And while their careers didn't overlap much, just 9 games head-to-head, Kareem walked away knowing Olajuwon wasn't just a great center. He was one of the most complete players the league had ever seen. There was no weakness. He could defend pick and rolls, switch on guards, post up, hit mid-range jumpers, pass out of doubles, protect the rim, and close games. Kareem didn't talk much about who was the best. He rarely entertained rankings, but when asked in later years about players who got it right, who played the position with integrity and depth, Hakeem was always near the top of his list, because at the end of the day, Kareem didn't just respect stats. He respected players who made the game better, and Hakeem Olajuwon made the game better in every possible way. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton weren't just rivals, they were intellectual foils, two of the most cerebral big men the NBA had ever seen. Their games were different, their backgrounds even more so. But Kareem didn't just respect Walton's ability to pass or rebound, he appreciated how Walton saw the game, how he communicated it, and how he brought joy, motion, and meaning to every team he touched. There's a reason Walton is one of Kareem's favorite players. It wasn't the longevity. Walton's career was riddled with injuries, and he played just over 470 regular season games. But in Kareem's eyes, greatness wasn't always about volume. Sometimes it was about purity. And when Bill Walton was healthy, his game was as close to pure basketball as anyone had ever seen. To understand the respect, you have to understand the matchups. Kareem and Walton only met in 14 regular season games and just one playoff series, the 1977 Western Conference Finals. That series was pivotal. Kareem's Lakers were stacked with talent, but Walton's Blazers, a team without another superstar, shocked them in 4 straight games. Walton averaged 19.3 points, 14.8 rebounds, 5.8 assists, and 3.3 blocks in the sweep. But the box score didn't capture what made him dangerous. He read the game 2 seconds ahead. Kareem, the master of space and timing, saw something rare in Walton. A big who didn't just react, he anticipated. From the high post, Walton could pick you apart with backdoor passes. He ran the floor like a forward, used touch instead of force, and anchored one of the most beautiful team offenses the league had ever seen. Kareem understood how difficult it was to stay that involved without needing to dominate the ball, and Walton did it without ego. That 1977 Blazers run ended with a championship. Walton was named Finals MVP, averaging 18.5 points, 19 rebounds, 5.2 assists, and 3.7 blocks. He was the engine of a system that emphasized movement, selflessness, and constant motion, a precursor to some of the most admired offenses in today's NBA. Kareem admired that kind of play. It wasn't just about size or stats, it was about elevating everyone else. But the bond between Kareem and Walton extended beyond the hardwood. Both men were intellectuals in their own right. Kareem was deeply rooted in political activism, writing, and jazz culture. Walton was a disciple of John Wooden, a passionate reader and a devotee of Grateful Dead concerts and counterculture values. Their friendship blossomed post-career, especially when Walton became a broadcaster and analyst. Walton praised Kareem's consistency, discipline, and enduring excellence. Kareem, in turn, often cited Walton's understanding of team basketball and his brilliant but all too brief prime. In interviews, Kareem has said that Walton played the game the way it should be played, and pointed to his 1977 to 1978 MVP season, one of the most impactful short peaks in NBA history. That season, Walton led the Blazers to a 50-10 record before going down with a foot injury. He averaged 18.9 points, 13.2 rebounds, 5.0 assists, and 2.5 blocks per game. Once again, the numbers don't tell the full story. The Blazers were a symphony on the court, and Walton was the conductor. They posted a plus 11.9 net rating when he played, one of the best ever recorded at the time. Without him, the system collapsed. Kareem recognized how rare it was for one player to provide that kind of foundational stability. There's also the humility factor. Kareem didn't always get along with his contemporaries. But Walton, he never tried to outshine Kareem. He never claimed he was better. He simply competed, admired, and then evolved into a storyteller who honored Kareem's legacy every time he picked up a microphone. That kind of grace, especially from someone who had every reason to feel robbed by injuries, mattered to Kareem. And while their careers were defined by different arcs, Kareem's by dominance and durability, Walton's by brilliance and brevity, Kareem never underestimated what Walton could have been Had health been on his side, he believed Walton had the mind, the touch, and the feel to be one of the top 5 centers ever, and he wasn't alone in that opinion. Their friendship continued into retirement. They spoke at Hall of Fame events. Walton publicly campaigned for Kareem to be recognized not just as a great player, but as a human being, one who had used his platform for civil rights and education. That mutual respect went beyond basketball. So, when Kareem names his favorite players, he doesn't just look at highlight reels or championship rings. He looks at how someone played the game, how they moved, how they made others better, and how they represented the deeper values of the sport. Bill Walton embodied all of that. And even if he didn't have the career totals, the trophies, or the spotlight that others enjoyed, Kareem saw in Walton something that was impossible to fake: genius, team-first brilliance, a big man who played like a point guard, thought like a coach, and loved the game with every inch of his being. That's why Walton made Kareem's list.
My memory of Bill Walton on the court goes back to 1977 when the Portland Trailblazers played the Los Angeles Lakers. I was really impressed with their ability to play hard on each game, and they swept us 4-0. I gotta give Bill a lot of credit for being the competitor that he was and not letting anything deter him from giving his team the support they needed to take the world champions.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar never played against Elgin Baylor in his prime. By the time Kareem entered the NBA in 1969, Elgin's knees had already begun betraying him, and his role on the Lakers was winding down. But that didn't matter. Kareem wasn't just watching what Baylor did in real time, he was studying who Baylor was and what he represented in the broader history of the game. That's why Kareem has repeatedly named Elgin Baylor among the players he admired most, not because they were contemporaries, but because Elgin helped shape the path Kareem himself would walk. Baylor's NBA debut came in 1958, when the league was still in its early years, and he didn't just arrive, he changed everything. At just 6 feet 5 inches, Baylor wasn't the biggest forward, but he introduced a new style of basketball that predated the athletic wing players of later decades. He was explosive, acrobatic, and unafraid to attack the rim. More than anything, Elgin Baylor brought hang time to the sport, a concept that didn't even exist before he arrived. While most players went up and came straight down, Baylor stayed suspended in air, twisting, turning, adjusting mid-flight. He made basketball aerial. Kareem, who came into the league over a decade later, saw in Baylor the original version of the kind of athletic freedom that players like Julius Erving and Michael Jordan would later perfect. But it all started with Baylor. The stats speak for themselves. Baylor averaged 27.4 points, 13.5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists per game over his 14-year career, numbers that, in the pre-pace and space era, were remarkable. In the 1961-62 season alone, he averaged 38.3 points and 18.6 rebounds per game, all while serving active duty in the U.S. Army and only playing games on the weekends. That's not a footnote. That's one of the most demanding schedules any professional athlete has ever endured. Kareem always respected that level of commitment, but there's more. Baylor was also one of the league's earliest stars to bring grace and power into the same sentence. He could bully his way to the basket one possession and float in for a scoop layup the next. Kareem, who built his own career on skill, footwork, and control, saw Baylor as someone who had blended creativity with discipline before it was fashionable. There's also the leadership component. Baylor never won a championship, and that fact is often used unfairly to diminish his legacy. But Kareem, who knew firsthand that titles require context, never held that against him. Baylor reached the NBA Finals 8 times, often going up against Bill Russell's dynastic Celtics. He once scored 61 points in an NBA Finals game, a record that still stands to this day. It wasn't a failure of greatness. It was a reflection of timing, and Kareem understood that. And though Kareem was never Baylor's teammate, they both wore the same uniform, the purple and gold of the Los Angeles Lakers. When Kareem joined the Lakers in 1975, Elgin Baylor was already retired, but his shadow was still present, not in a burdensome way, but as a cultural foundation. Baylor had helped legitimize the Lakers' move from Minneapolis to Los Angeles. He had been the face of the franchise when the city was still adjusting to having professional basketball. His work had laid the groundwork for what Kareem, Magic, and eventually Kobe and LeBron would build upon. Even off the court, Kareem admired Baylor's stoicism. Baylor wasn't a loud personality. He wasn't a showman or a headline chaser, but he was deeply respected by teammates, by opponents, and by the league as a whole. That kind of quiet command was something Kareem valued. He understood what it meant to lead with consistency, to fight battles, cultural and personal, without always raising your voice. Baylor was also one of the first black players in the league to challenge racism directly. In 1959, he refused to play in a game in Charleston, West Virginia, because the hotel wouldn't accommodate black players. It was a bold, dangerous decision in that era, but Baylor made it and stood by it. Kareem, who would boycott the 1968 Olympics in protest of racial injustice, saw in Baylor a kindred spirit, an athlete who believed basketball wasn't separate from real life. In interviews and speeches, Kareem has repeatedly cited Baylor as one of the pioneers who changed the game. He once said, "Elgin Baylor set the template for the modern forward. Everybody talks about the above-the-rim game. Elgin was doing that before anybody else even thought about it." It's not hyperbole. Look at Baylor's influence. Dr. J said he watched Elgin growing up and tried to imitate him. Michael Jordan named Baylor among the innovators. Kobe Bryant once called him one of the true artists of basketball. If greatness is measured not just in rings but in ripples, the waves you leave behind, then Elgin Baylor's legacy is enormous. For Kareem, Baylor wasn't just a legend in the record books. He was a bridge from the old game to the modern game, from the stilted, two-footed pivots to the elegance of flight. And even though Kareem built his game around grounded fundamentals, footwork, skyhooks, balance, he always admired the grace with which Baylor had defied gravity. That's why Elgin Baylor closes out this list, not just as a scorer, not just as a Laker, but as an origin point, a player who showed Kareem and everyone who followed that the game could be more than a competition. It could be art. And that's what Kareem saw in Elgin Baylor. Not just a player, but a pioneer who turned basketball into something closer to art. If you love seeing the game through the eyes of legends, you'll want to hear how Coach K, the winningest coach in college basketball history, names his 6 favorite players, from generational icons to the Duke stars who defined an era. Tap that next video and keep the journey going. Also, do not forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe the channel for more future videos.